operates a hand. And the hand is basically a three-point suspension device. There are three main strings on the hand: the thumb, the pinky, and the wrist. And by manipulating those relative to one another, inclining them in a plane or left and right, you get a pretty basic action. I have added to this basic Albert Roser three-point suspension a fourth string which picks up the elbow. Now, I'm picking up that elbow string with my pinky, my small finger on my right hand. I also have added to this control a small hook, a little toothpick sticking out here, whereby I can reach into the center of the control where these two strings are located. Each of these picks up one of the two hands and brings it up in a specialized gesture. Now, I've modified the two hands so that they give somewhat different kinds of gestures. Please make yourself at home. There's
Sorry.
That's all right. So much for the hand. Well, I'm going to say one more thing about the hand controls. These two hand controls are tied via two strings, one at the front center and one at the rear center, up to two screw eyes on each side, so that I can pick up his left hand by moving his right hand control laterally. Now, I can operate his left hand and his right hand in conjunction. Sometimes he conducts an orchestra or a chorus. And of course, his head is suspended by 3 points, one on each ear and one on his nose. Those locations, the nose is at the front and the ears are at the ends of the second crosspiece on the top of the airplane control. So I can tilt the control left and right, up or down. The nose string, which is attached here, lifts his head upwards. Now, if I really wish him to see his toes, I'll bend his back strings, which are suspended at the very center of the controller. They bear the entire weight of the marionette, the body. The head is separately suspended. But what I do is to bend those shoulder strings slightly. Then I can drop his head even further. Without bending the back strings, his head goes down only so far, and instead of looking straight down, he bows, because the tail string, or back string, is located at the very back of the control. That's a very standard operating feature of most marionettes, to have a tail string. I would say it's pretty common to have two ear strings on a marionette. It's less common to have a third string lifting either the nose or the back of the head. It may be objectionable if you're doing photographic, cinematic, or video work to have a string attached to the nose, particularly if it's a contrasting color to the skin. I don't mind that. I want people to know that this is a stringed puppet marionette, so I deliberately allow the strings to show. There are 18 of them which reach the marionette. Now, practicing the manipulation of this will yield even better results, but I think you'll find when you pick up one of these two or a Pepito that it's remarkably easy to operate. I have recently begun to say about puppetry that I think it's really mostly acting. Puppetry is acting or dancing, I think. And I know my mom and dad always impressed my brothers and me with the idea that if the puppet cannot move well, it's not successful. It can be pretty ugly and awkward and funny looking, but if it moves well, you probably have a successful marionette. Adding a little gesture like that, like the little flick of the foot, is as a bit of, just as a grace note, a little touch, I think it helps you a great deal in performance. I've designed Pepito with the idea that he would be a silent figure, that he was mute, he was unable to speak. He's an orphan. I do a little biography of him. He's an orphan in the 14th century in Europe, and he travels around from city to city with a small group of entertainers. And he's a very optimistic, fun-loving, friendly, sensitive young fellow of about 12 years. Now, I do have him bow or bend forward to put his weight above his feet before he rises. You can have a marionette rise in a way that's impossible for a human being, but I think it adds to the effectiveness of the identification with human beings if he doesn't defy all of the laws of gravity without reason, without justification. So if he's having a hard time getting up, he may try once. Of course, because of his youth, he's probably able to get up easily. But I like to give him a little pause and have him throw his hands forward to help him get his weight, and then maybe step forward to catch himself. Those are manipulation fine points or techniques that I like to use. As I said, there are two specials, and I'm hooking one now. And you know how a dog, a little puppy, will look at you and turn its head? Yeah. I've copied that as a gesture I frequently use with Pepito. I've given him a pointed nose because I want it to be easy to know that he's looking at you. And then once you understand that he's looking at you, and I usually use him in a walk-around situation. I don't do a narrative with him at all.
His eyes.
His eyes are just a little bit crossed, so that when he approaches you, it may support the illusion that he's looking at you.
Very much. Come on now. he's really looking at me. I'm getting embarrassed.
He does invade a person's space.
He does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it possible to make one marionette and another one? Or is that?
Yes, I would think so. These are such large controls that it's quite awkward to make that effort.
Okay. So it makes it kind of hard to interact with each other.
Yes, my mom and dad developed a controller which would allow that. It was about half as long as this and half as wide, and it was made of kind of an oval shape, and it didn't have any projecting points. Now these two can be whispering to one another, and I guess you could say if they're embraced, that the one is embracing the other.
It's the nose.
But as you notice on Rodney, I've given him a good snout and long ears as well.
Yeah.
And that is partly for character reasons, but it's also technically or mechanically much easier to make the head move if those 3 points are far enough from one another that you can get a good suspension out of it. Another time, I probably would remove the string from the end of his nose and put it at the front of his hairline. At the same time, moving his ear strings back behind his ears. Or I could have put the nose string at the back of his head, and that way I would have the 3 points still. As you may already surmise, if you have 3 points of suspension on an object, you can tip it in any direction. If you have just the 2 points, all you can do is lift the left or the right half. But with a third point, whether it's in back or in front of the ears, you can get an entirely universal turn. So that would be one very important hint that I've used, and I heard it from Albert Grozer at one of these workshops, probably about 5 or 6, 7 years ago. Or no, it's longer ago than that. 14 years.
14.
So, as we work together, I hope you will take the time to practice manipulating with any of these three. Take a break, and I'll be happy to coach you with any questions you may have. I did write very specific instructions in the workbook about how to string the marionette. I believe that with a little patience, you should be able to string them without my saying anything more, if you read the book. But I'm not going to stick you with that. You can do that. How high above the ground you want your controller to be when you're performing. And I'll immediately make a suggestion that you do the same thing with your controller that you do with a computer keyboard or a typewriter, for those of you who remember what they are. Make sure that as you're working, your wrist is lower than your elbow, closer to the ground than your elbow. That way you eliminate a lot of fatigue. I have strung Pepito longer than that, deliberately, because I want to support the illusion that I'm not controlling him so much. I don't want people to be busy watching my hand all the time. So I've lifted it up another 5 or 6 inches higher than it probably would be comfortable to do. begin by setting your shoulder strings